private images from a lost world of communism in Eastern Europe. The communists claimed they were building a socialist paradise. Most people think they created hell on earth. But what was life really like for the people of Eastern Europe, effectively imprisoned behind the Iron Curtain? The answers are sometimes surprising. While some cannot forget the abnormality of those times, others feel that they led perfectly ordinary lives. This series, through rarely seen archive and personal testimony, captures the real lives of those living under communist rule. It was a way of life that disappeared when communism collapsed across Eastern Europe 2 decades ago. East Germany was socialism's showcase state. One of its iconic faces was a children's TV puppet called Sandman. He was designed to send East Germany's children happy to bed and to win their hearts for socialism.
It simply had to reflect life in East Germany. It had to transmit class consciousness and feelings of solidarity.
The Sandman was made by people who used to live under socialism. They had a vision of socialism and communism and were happy to spread that vision, namely the vision of a better world, a more just world.
And East Germany's role model for that better world was the Sandman's favorite holiday destination, the Soviet Union. East Germany was born out of the ruins of the Second World War. It would emerge from the Soviet zone of occupation established with the total defeat of Nazi Germany. Everywhere, symbols of the Soviet Union and images of its leader, Joseph Stalin, showed where the real power now lay. In the summer of 1945, 14-year-old schoolgirl Erika Riemann went back to her old school in the company of friends. A day she would never forget.
Wo früher Adolf Hitler hing jetzt das Bild von
We saw that Hitler's portrait had been replaced with Stalin's.
Ich an das Bild gegangen und habe dann da eine Schleife den Bart gemalt.
So I drew a bow with some lipstick on Stalin's moustache.
Das war ein Streich,
Because when I saw his portrait, I thought he looked sad.
Da hatte ich mich
That wasn't a good move. I never wanted to be an artist again in my whole life.
das Leben nie wieder machen.
Erika was sentenced to 10 years in prison, part of which she spent at the former Nazi concentration camp at Sachsenhausen. Here she was subjected to a mock execution.
Und dann kamen wir dann in den
We had to go into a shower room.
Und da wurde also dann gesagt, dass sie das jetzt mit uns.
They told us they would do the same things they had done to the Jews, that there wouldn't be water coming out of the showers but gas.
Und das war auch eine
That was a very terrifying situation.
fürchterliche Situation. Es war schon eine richtig.
There was great panic and then great relief when only warm water came out.
Wasser kam. War eine Verlegung, war ich in Torgau.
I spent time in the fortress at Torgau. where many women were raped. I hadn't been raped yet, but the decision had been made that I'd be next.
Still only a child, Erika suffered repeated physical and sexual abuse, like this episode in Torgau prison.
It's affected my whole life. I hadn't had any sexual experience at the time, but I had to take all my clothes off and to sit on a bowl which was pushed down the stairs amongst all the men's baying. I can't talk about it. I've felt the repercussions till this day. I felt ashamed and dirty. I'm a mother and a grandmother, but after all these years, it still remains, and I still feel dirty and degraded. It's very hard to endure such things when you're that young.
Over 150,000 Germans were detained by the communists in special camps like Sachsenhausen. Almost a third of them died in captivity.
In August
1952, 80,000 young pioneers were invited to Dresden because we, the children, had to carry on socialism.
Denn wir sind diejenigen, die das dann perspektivisch weiterführen sollen.
At the age of 12, I was proud to attend the first pioneer meeting in Dresden.
Dresden zu diesem ersten Pioniertreffen zu gehen. Wissen wir,
We knew about the Hitler Youth during the Third Reich, that they also wore neckties and played drums and trumpets. They wore uniforms.
Uniformen.
When the pioneer organization was founded, many adults were opposed because it reminded them of the Hitler regime.
Das ist ja schon wieder bei Hitler. Unsere Kinder.
So parents said that's not going to happen to our children, not again. But my father was a teacher, and so he had the task of recruiting children for the pioneer organizations.
Organisation zu werden.
The pioneers served the newly formed workers' and peasants' state of East Germany, a one-party dictatorship modelled on the Soviet Union. Its propaganda stressed the dangers from Western imperialism, including the bizarre claim that America was dropping plagues of Colorado beetles from the air to destroy socialist crops.
Nur Kartoffelacker, und so haben wir diese Kartoffelkäfer gesammelt und jetzt erzählt,
They would praise us for having collected those beetles.
diesen Kartoffelkäfer abgeworfen haben. Und
The very same American aeroplanes that had bombed Dresden, they would tell us, had also unleashed those beetles.
es wird wiederum erzählt, Flugzeuge, die Dresden zerbombt haben, sind auch diejenigen, die
Evil American imperialism.
der böse amerikanische Imperialismus. Und wir Kinder machen jetzt das Gelöbnis,
We made our first pioneer vow in Dresden. We children vowed that we would do anything to avoid such a terrible and evil war in the future.
wir 80.000 Kinder in den Schulen
80,000 children together said, that we promise.
für mich. Nehme ich diese Botschaft
And I made that vow not with my mind, but with my heart.
mit dem Herzen mit, vom Gefühl her. Stalin war der große Held, der
Stalin was the great hero. He was a god to us. Stalin the intelligent, Stalin the wise.
Kluge, Stalin der Weise. Und Stalin ist derjenige,
Stalin was the representative of the free world of socialism, and he was our role model.
freie Welt des Sozialismus, ja, dass man sich schadet.
We would follow him unconditionally.
Ihm werden wir bedingungslos folgen.
Wir grüßen die Heimat im Alt und Fett, wir wollen sie schützen und hegen. Wir reichen die Kinder der ganzen Welt die Hand zur Freundschaft entgegen. Der schönste Gruß unserer Republik gilt Josef, Stalin und Wilhelm Pieck. Wir grüßen als Kinder der neuen Zeit, Pioniere sind immer bereit. Wir lieben.
It was the high point for Stalinism in East Germany, and a dangerous time for those not singing the party's tune. Ursula Rumin was a dancer in revue and cabaret. By 1952, she'd landed a job as a scriptwriter with the state-owned film company, DEFA.
I had a contract with DEFA on a movie called The Destinies of Women.
Das war also eine Geschichte.
The story was about women in East Berlin and women in West Berlin. The women in the East would be politically orientated and organized.
Und politisch ausgerichtet, und in West-Berlin waren das nur
Those in West Berlin would only be little dolls who cared about nothing but jewelry and fashion.
Und
obviously, the East Berlin authorities wanted to show that life was good only in the East, and everything in the West was corrupt.
Und im Westen ist alles tant.
The Destinies of Women, filmed on the streets of East Berlin, was released in 1952. The regime wanted such films to help build socialism, and Ursula's employers now wanted her to become a communist.
The chief scriptwriter asked me why I wasn't a member of the party.
Berlin was then the espionage capital of the world. And for those like Ursula living and working on this front line of the Cold War, East Germany could be a lawless place.
Ich fuhr zur Friedrichstraße. Ich wurde an der Friedrichstraße.
I went to the Friedrichstraße. There, two gentlemen addressed me by name, inviting me to get into their car, telling me that they would take me to my work at DEFA.
Mich zur DEFA zu bringen. Sondern die Fahrt dauerte ziemlich lange.
We drove very fast for quite a while. I was a bit surprised by this because my office wasn't that far away. I'd been kidnapped and nobody knew.
Protesting her innocence, Ursula was sentenced to 15 years hard labor for espionage by military court and transported almost 2,000 miles away to a labor camp in Vorkuta, Siberia.
Es liegt ja am Eismeer, 30 Kilometer.
We were close to the Polar Sea. There was a wind with ice crystals.
Fast noch schlimmer war der Sommer.
The summer was almost worse.
Aber die Tundra in der
The tundra around Vorkuta was a marshland. There were hordes of mosquitoes.
Zerstochen wurden, aber dann bei 45
To work in 45 degrees centigrade heat, without sun protection, without water for 12 hours every day.
From 1945 onwards, tens of thousands were sent from eastern Germany to Siberia, many of them never to return. Ursula, one of the lucky ones, was released in 1954, still protesting her innocence. Only years later would she reveal that she had in fact worked for British intelligence since before her arrival in Berlin.
I would do errands for the English.
Für die Engländer gemacht.
I worked as a courier. In retrospect, it seems very naive. I don't understand how I could have been that stupid.
6 months after Ursula's kidnap, on the 17th of June 1953, the workers rose up against the workers' and peasants' state. What had begun as a strike amongst construction workers over pay soon turned into wider demands for free elections and the resignation of the government itself. By late morning, Soviet troops stationed in East Germany had to intervene.
At 11:30 we heard the tanks, the chains of the tanks. Then we realized the Russians were coming. The crowd started howling. And when the people at the end of the demonstration refused to give way, the soldiers fired in the air. And when you hear gunfire, you start running automatically.
Dann rennen sie automatisch.
Horst Krieter, a Berlin petrol pump attendant, was in the thick of the action that day.
Ich weiß noch, rechts von dem Marx-Engels-Platz stand ein...
We threw stones at the tanks.
Wir konnten ja immer in diese Trümmer verschwinden.
Seeing the tanks firing in your direction, the sheer sound of it causes you to piss in your pants.
Und der schießt. Bei uns auf den
Someone had died on the Marx Engels Square that day.
Zu Tode kommt, der wahrscheinlich überfahren worden.
He was run over by a tank.
Ausgang des Marx-Engels-Platz war.
There was a blanket and a wooden cross which said "Murdered by the Soviet Army."
Und da stand schon drauf, von den Sowjets ermordet. Für mich ist das ein Ehrentag.
It was a day of glory for me. We showed them what could be done. The police could do nothing. The government could do nothing. The secret police, the Stasi, could do nothing.
Over 50 civilians were killed that day. In the clampdown that followed, more than 20,000 were arrested, scores were executed. The country's leaders had been caught off guard. From now on, security and the control of the people would be the government's overriding concern. The people themselves were concerned about simply getting by. The 1950s were austere times, and food and goods were in limited supply. Families and organizations in West Germany sent aid packages to the east.
We were so happy and surprised as we lived such a frugal life. When the package arrived, we couldn't believe our eyes. The wrapping was so attractive and colorful. We'd never seen anything like this. Roland, the youngest, couldn't open the presents fast enough, helping Wolfgang beaming at his discoveries.
Mein Vater hatte also 1954.
In 1954, my father received the 8mm camera 8K8. These are the first films he recorded at Christmas.
1954, hier sieht man. Und der Kleine,
I'm the baby, 18 months old. That's his self-made gramophone. We lived in Berlin in Karlshorst, which was under Soviet occupation. Only state functionaries and those employed in ministries were allowed to live there. My father worked in television as a cameraman. He was, of course, a member of the party, but he wasn't totally convinced about it. My mother's wearing a necklace. Of course, that's only for the film. Now she's trying out the new vacuum cleaner.
Omega hieß der.
It's called the Omega.
Der wurde ungefähr so fast 20 Jahre produziert.
It was East Germany's people's vacuum cleaner.
Der Volksstaubsauger in der DDR. Oder wenn wir mit der Schulklasse in Berlin-Karlshorst noch 1960.
In 1960, Khrushchev came to East Germany.
Die DDR. Und da sind die auf der Rückfahrt zum Flughafen Schönefeld.
When he passed through Karlshorst on his way to the airport, my class and I had to wave.
Winken. Und erst viel, viel später, wo ich mal die Bilder mal...
Only much later, when I developed the film and got it back home, I realized I'd waved at Erich Milke, the head of the Stasi, who was sitting next to the driver.
Der saß nämlich vorne neben dem Fahrer. Also in den 50er Jahren war man natürlich im Westen.
In the 1950s, people had few creature comforts.
Man hatte sich also für jedes gefreut, was nicht jeden Tag gab.
We were happy when we got hold of goods which weren't available every day, like bananas, which we bought in the West. Before 1961, it was still possible to drive into West Berlin.
Nach West Berlin fahren.
On August the 13th, 1961, construction began on the Berlin Wall. East Germany called it an anti-fascist protective wall designed to keep the West out. In fact, it was built to lock East Germans inside their socialist paradise. Around 3 million of them had already fled to the West, threatening the very existence of East Germany. One of those preventing people from escaping was Hagen Koch, the young pioneer at Dresden, who was now a member of the expanding Ministry of State Security, known as the Stasi.
Und so kommen wir am Nachmittag an den Grenzübergang.
In the afternoon, we reached the border crossing at Checkpoint Charlie. I was ordered to paint a thick white line on the street at that border crossing point.
Ganz dicken weißen Strich über die Straße zu ziehen.
I stood with one leg in the west and the other in the east, and my assignment was to show the evil, and I repeat, evil people in the west, so far and no further.
Dort ist Kapitalismus und hier ist Sozialismus.
Capitalism is over there, and here is socialism. I painted that line and was still firmly convinced that that border would avoid a Third World War and help to maintain peace.
Wird den Frieden sichern helfen. Ich war nicht der Einzige.
Many people were against it. I was not the only person who was for it.
Growing up behind the wall were these schoolchildren in the village of Golzow. They were about to become the subject of a long-term television project. Winfried Jerschel was the youngest child in his class.
They
built a new rural school, brand new and impressive. It was an East German film, and an East German film was always a propaganda film. They obviously wanted to communicate the message that a small village has a brand new school and all the children are happy.
I
remember that the questions at school became more probing, such as what does the Sandman look like? They wanted to see what programs we were watching at home. During the early years, they imprisoned people when they watched television from the West. Our antenna was always pointed towards the West.
Die Antenne zeigte immer nach Westen. Und der Lehrer hatte damals so die Funktion.
The teacher tried to find out if people were watching television from the West.
Gucken die Leute zu Hause Westfernsehen.
East Germany was an atheist state, but Marie-Louise came from a religious family.
We were 6 children, and my parents worked on the collective farm.
Sag mir, wo du stehst. Sag mir, wo du stehst. Sag mir,
Ich war da gar kein Jungpionier.
I was a Protestant. I wasn't one of the young pioneers who all wore the same neckerchief.
Also das macht ja keinen Unterschied.
Nevertheless, I was allowed to sing in the choir. I wore my private clothes.
Bluse an, also kein Pionierhalstuch. Man wusste, dass das
We were made to feel that religion had no place at school.
Davon hat man auch gar nicht in der Schule erzählt oder irgendwie.
Winfried wanted to be an inventor and was of a practical, inquiring nature.
Auch während der Studienzeit uns die ganzen Lehren von Marx, Lenin.
We learned a lot about the political theories of Marx and Lenin.
Jeder nach seinen Bedürfnissen sollte jeder leben, und ich habe dann in der Schule auch als Kind öfter mal gefragt, wie das da läuft.
Once I asked my teacher, when does the real communism start? Real communism without money. The teacher was obviously as smart as I was and said that we would succeed in trading without money sometime after the millennium.
Da wird das Geld abgeschafft, ja, und als Kind.
As an ignorant child, I thought that's fantastic.
Prima, war, weil ich habe nicht gleich anders gedacht. Weil
heute brennt die Sonne ganz erbarmungslos.
On that path from socialism to the communist millennium lay East Germany's version of the swinging 60s.
Wie wunderbar.
Singers like Frank Scherbel, dubbed East Germany's Cliff Richard, were sometimes told by the party what to sing.
Dass ihr es wisst, heute bin ich wieder da, heute beim Party-Twist.
Dazu kam noch, dass ich bei der Armee.
At the time I was in the army, and there was a song, Girl in Front of the Barrack Gate, Will You Wait For Me, and I'll ask you to go out with me today, which I hadn't sung because it was too stupid. I feared for my career because I didn't know what kind of songs they would make me sing. Because I didn't sing Girl in Front of the Barrack Gate, I was demoted and had to spend 2 days in prison.
Ich wurde degradiert, Schulterstücke abgerissen.
This musical, a kind of East Side Story, starring Frank, was officially sanctioned.
Ich glaube, dass
It was the party that decided to create a distraction for the people. They took West Side Story as their model.
Frank's co-star and then wife, Chris Dirk, misses much about East Germany.
Art and culture had a much higher value placed on them. In East Germany, singers weren't a commodity. Today, singers are a commodity that has to be bought and sold. There are many things I miss.
Wolkenloser Himmel und der Wind, der schweigt.
Chris Dirk enjoyed socialist life behind the wall.
Ja, und ich habe wirklich nicht schlecht gelebt.
I didn't lead a bad life, and I have to say that the Berlin Wall didn't really disturb me.
Das macht mich manchmal sehr sauer.
And it makes me angry when East Germany is often reduced to Stasi and I don't know what. Sometimes I have a feeling that they think we lived in clay huts.
Gelebt und sind in Sack und Asche gegangen.
Du hast ja ein Ziel vor den Augen.
Most East Germans, like Jürgen Hartwig, the baby in the 1950s home movies, conformed to what the state required of them. Here he attends his Jugendweihe, a secular coming-of-age ceremony for 14-year-olds introduced by the communists. Despite appearances, however, Jürgen was no communist.
I was actually West-orientated. I was interested in beat music. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones. It was clear I wasn't a socialistically orientated person who would wear a blue shirt for the free German youth. I started wondering how to make it to the West. I tried to escape through Hungary in 1973, but things went wrong and I was sent to prison for 2 years.
By the late 1970s, disillusion with the reality of life in East Germany was spreading.
This is my farewell video. I was 19, had just passed my A-levels and going into military service. It was a real rite of passage.
Das ist mein Zimmer in Dresden bei meinen Eltern.
This is my room in Dresden, in my parents' house.
An den Wänden die Plakate mit meinen
All the posters of my ideals, my dreams. All these were shattered.
die durch diese Armeezeit, also
Learning the truth about the Warsaw Pact's invasion of Czechoslovakia, which had happened a decade earlier, was a defining moment.
macht alles keinen Sinn mehr. Diese Panzer hier sind natürlich nicht 68.
This is footage from East German TV of some of our tanks, like the ones that advanced into Czechoslovakia in 1968.
in Dresden auf dem Altmarkt und fuhren gen Prag.
I actually remember being there, aged 10, looking at the tanks leaving for Prague, and I remember winking at one of the soldiers. But when I joined the army, I realized what they had done, and I felt angry and betrayed.
Sachen und diese Bedrohung natürlich konkreter, ne?
Such feelings could only be expressed privately. The public face of East Germany promoted the economic and scientific achievements of real existing socialism.
Also die Weltraumforschung, die Kosmos.
Space exploration and the achievements of the Soviet cosmonauts were reflected in the Sandman. They had something to do with the belief in progress. It was believed that communism would also be established in space. Obviously, it was used to make socialism appear victorious.
Besondere Überraschung haben wir für unsere Kinder in der Deutschen Demokratischen Republik. Vor nicht allzu langer Zeit hat der Sandmann bei uns festgemacht mit einer Spezialrakete.
The day before that space mission, former Golzo schoolgirl Marie-Louise married Stefan, an army pilot and party member. Despite her religious background, She is committed to the workers' and peasant state.
I thought of East Germany as my country. I definitely felt at home there. Actually, even today, I still remain an East German.
By now, Marie-Louise was bringing up a family. She felt part of the appeal of East Germany lay in its support for women, especially mothers. She liked the emphasis on childcare facilities, on women's economic independence and professional opportunities.
Wir hatten eigentlich viele Rechte als Frau im Osten.
Women had many rights there.
Als Frau in der DDR,
being a woman in East Germany was good. I have good memories.
Die hatten es zum Teil leichter als heute.
It was easier than today, for example.
Dass man auf jeden Fall nie
You had the certainty that even if you were a single mother, you would never have ended up sitting in a flat without heating or worrying about your electricity bills. We felt secure and looked after.
Wir fühlten uns da aufgehoben und betreut.
The more I see you. East Germany's idea of looking after its citizens also involved spying on them. No act was too intimate to be observed, and no other country in history has spied on its citizens as East Germany has, with 1 in 6 of its population informing on the rest. High up on the watch list of the state's enemies was the emerging punk rock movement.
And so it goes.
Ich bin einfach mit Schottschein.
All I wanted was to have a bit of fun, but the state obviously saw it differently. We were criminalized, we were politicized.
Chaos was the lead singer in a punk rock band called Wuttenfall, meaning fit of rage. His best friend Zappa was the bass guitarist. What Chaos didn't know was that his best friend was a Stasi informer.
My code name was Captain. They gave me a phone number, and when I called, I was to say Captain speaking.
Zappa had succumbed to persistent Stasi pressure for information about the punks he knew, and signed an agreement with the secret police.
The Stasi dictated to me a 2-page text full of that gibberish, saying, I swear not to undertake anything against socialism and I will work with the Ministry of State Security. I simply thought that I'd sign it and then they'd let me go and I'd be done with it. But they had that lousy signature of mine. So they continued to approach me and say, you've signed it, so now you can tell us when the concerts are. And I had to sit around at the Stasi building for hours and hours. I said, okay, I will inform you when the concerts take place.
Natürlich nie ein Konzert gesagt, dass es dann doch so massiv war bei mir.
I didn't expect it to be so drastic for me. By the end, there were 9 informers set on me.
Und dann hat die Stasi mir sozusagen deine auffindbar bin. Und weil es mir nicht einfach so gehen wollte.
In return, I had to swear that I would vote in the next elections.
Da war gerade Wahltermin der DDR.
Chaos only found out about his best friend's treachery after the wall came down, when he read his Stasi file.
Tja, Enttäuschung.
I felt great disappointment at my friend's behavior, especially because of the breach of trust.
Natürlich, das war ein Fehler.
It was a mistake. It was a horrible year. I was at the mercy of the Stasi.
Stasi hatte mich ja dann auch in der Hand und so.
Krieger has a best of 20 meters and 71.
Heidi Krieger's life was also dramatically affected by the Stasi. Heidi was one of communism's star athletes. Here she is seen winning gold in the shot at the European Championships in 1986.
The German Democratic Republic, 21 meters.
Also ich habe sehr gerne.
I loved being a sporting champion for East Germany.
Ich bin ins Ausland gefahren und habe sie gerne repräsentiert.
I liked representing my country abroad.
Einfach weil ich in meinem kleinbürgerlichen Denken...
Simply because my narrow-mindedness would make me believe, with our achievements, we strengthened the Socialist Republic.
Die sozialistische Republik.
But Heidi paid a heavy price for her sporting success. Unwittingly, Heidi was one of 10,000 East German athletes who were part of a Stasi-run doping program.
Und irgendwann war es so, dass also der Trainer mir auch so...
At one point, shortly after I'd turned 16, the coach suddenly started giving me packs of pills.
Das sind unterstützende Mittel. Die nimmt jeder.
He would tell me, these are to help you, everyone takes them. You'll handle the training program better, you won't get ill, and if you're injured, you'll recover more quickly. I trusted him and started taking those pills. There are teenagers whose sexuality hasn't been fixed yet during adolescence, and probably I was in that situation. I was neither fish nor fowl. In that period, they gave me those pills. Because of the pills, my balance switched over to the masculine side.
Massive doses of anabolic steroids over several years changed Heidi's body forever.
I realized they'd made a lab rat out of me because they saw my potential. East Germany has taken my life away from me, and without asking. I wasn't allowed to decide for myself what I wanted to become.
The effects of the doping system finally forced Heidi to undergo a sex change operation. And today, Heidi is called Andreas.
Heidi
still exists.
Ein Stückchen Heidi bin ich immer noch.
I'm still a bit Heidi. That is my life. I used to be a woman, and I'll probably always remain a woman up to a certain extent.
The man ultimately in charge of East Germany's doping program was Stasi leader Erich Mielke, filmed here on a hunt. This is the Schorfheide. The Kaiser hunted here. Nazi leaders hunted here. And hunting here was a way of life for some Politburo members, a time when important business was done.
Es gab ein teilweise festes Schema.
We usually went hunting on Tuesdays after the Politburo meeting.
Sitzung beendet wurde.
Mielke was an enthusiastic but inaccurate hunter.
Rausgefahren in den Wald. Mielke hatte spezielle...
Mielke had specific ideas about hunting because he wasn't a very good shot.
Weil eben nicht so ein guter Schütze war.
The forester who went with him had to intervene and shoot the prey to try and make him look successful at least once during the hunt.
Stasi officer Bernd Bruckner was party leader Erich Honecker's bodyguard. His boss was addicted to hunting.
Auch hier war zielstrebig, nahm sich etwas vor.
Honecker was determined. It might have rained cats and dogs or even snowed, and he would still want to go hunting with his fur hat on.
Auf unsere guten, treuen, zuverlässigen Yachthelfer, unsere Genossen des Bezirkes Erfurt, die hier angetreten sind, ein dreifaches Heute! 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 Die Staatsjagd ist beendet.
Animals had to be imported from other Eastern Bloc countries like Hungary because they'd killed so many.
Und da wurde das dann zeitweise schon übersteigt.
They overdid it. From time to time they didn't respect the hunting restrictions on certain game.
Sondern dass dann auch zeitweise
they shot everything. That was too much.
In a profoundly unfree society like East Germany, any free space was to be treasured. Nudism had long been popular, especially on the beaches.
Juanita hieß das Mädchen aus der großen fernen Welt.
I was employed in the amorous sector, as it was called in East Germany. To take your clothes off in an erotic fashion was something very new. I started with my Edelweiss striptease. People laughed and were enthusiastic because they hadn't seen anything like it before. Striptease was not a common thing in East Germany, but at one point there was a big bang and striptease started booming.
This footage shows Heidi Witwer's audition for a striptease license in the late 1980s. The shop assistant from Leipzig soon finds herself in demand at exclusive Communist Party functions.
It was clear that the Stasi was involved and that similar things had always existed. At some events, people arrived exclusively in monopoly capitalist cars. I became aware of what things actually occurred in East Germany. I saw champagne in huge bowls, fruit like bananas, and everything we didn't have. I earned lots of money. I wish I could still get that dosh. I bought all those things which ordinary citizens couldn't afford to buy. As artists, we were lucky to perform at marvelous and fantastic events. There were some great things about East Germany.
Former Golzo schoolboy Winfried still appeared to be buying into the communist dream. He's getting married to Sabine, whom he met at a dance. They enjoy a good socialist wedding. But at work, Winfried is in trouble. He's joined the party, but is summoned to appear before a party meeting for misrepresenting his qualifications.
We are meeting to decide how to punish you for your wrongdoing. Which we might have to record in your party book. We will give you a chance to defend yourself. You must tell us what you did for the party. And explain why we, as a collective, should not punish you.
It's been made clear to me by you that I must never lie again while working in the factory. I would have liked to travel to the West and probably would have stayed there, but it wasn't possible, so I had to make other plans. I played along with the system.
By the mid-1980s, East Germany was a decaying society, morally and economically. You can see it in these photographs of ordinary people's lives. The fact that such images were exhibited at all is as surprising as their realism.
Ja, in der Zeit, als ich da im Gummiwerk in Thüringen.
While I was in the plant that makes rubber in Thuringia, I met Andreas, king of soot.
Dessen Aufgabe war es, und musste
his job was to weigh the soot and mix the right amount with the rubber.
Dann eben die richtige Mischung beifügen. Es war immer so üblich.
Every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, there'd be a big guards procession in Unter den Linden by the Stasi Guards Felix Dzerzhinsky Regiment.
Das war dieses Felix Dzerzhinsky. Da war immer dieser eine.
There used to be the same old man leading the parade, who would march as though he was the Führer, the leader.
Der Führer.
I often remember Tamerlan. She was that powerful type of woman.
Und da sah die Wohnung grauenvoll.
Her flat looked horrible.
Sie ja selbst den Sohn so erzogen
Elderly
hatte.
people got small pensions. She was a soulmate. She had wonderful strength.
Auch eine Seelenpartnerin. Sie hatte eine wunderbare Stärke. Da lag ich eines Tages in der Dresdner Neustadt. Die hatte
One day I was lying on the grass in an area where new building was going on. I had a hangover. I felt a breeze on my cheek, opened my eyes and saw a little girl with blonde hair and snow-white skin.
Die Augen auf und sehe da ein kleines Mädchen mit weißblonden Haaren und Schneeballsaugen.
I told her, "You look like an angel." And she answered, "I am an angel."
Ich bin ein Engel.
She ran away and came back dressed as an angel.
Kostüm wieder.
Gundula's photos prompted great interest from the Stasi. They had plans to arrest her on bogus charges of working for the CIA.
Und ich hatte immer, da war noch keine Zwischendecke in meinem Atelier.
In the ceiling of my studio was a beam which was hollow. I wasn't naive and I was concerned about my photographs. I would hide them in that hollow beam.
Hohlen Balken versteckt. Ja, ich war also immer darauf auch hatte das schon.
I always expected the Stasi to show up at some point.
Dass die irgendwann mal kommen.
A new generation was seeking alternative lifestyles outside party structures.
Das war der letzte richtige Winter.
That's us in the Trabant.
That was the last really bad winter.
That was 1985. You were pregnant but didn't know it yet.
That's Roland trying to fix the Trabi. No petrol.
Und auf dem Trecker. Es gab's Kartoffelbrei.
Mashed potato. And it was important that we could eat well, eat lots, eat fatty food.
Essen konnte. Ja, hier sieht man das. Nur guck mal, wie dünn du warst.
Look how skinny you were. You've got more muscles now.
Und das war auch dort, ne?
Ja, das war bei Roland.
We didn't have a bathtub, and we were very happy to take a bath at Roland's before New Year's Eve.
Dass wir ein Bad nehmen konnten bei dem Roland.
Also erstmal bin ich in Dresden aufgewachsen, wo es zum Beispiel gar kein
I grew up in Dresden, where no West German TV existed. It was called the Valley of Unknowing. I was very unknowing in many ways.
Das hat mir also zumindest in meiner Kindheit vieles viel leichter gemacht. Und dann gibt's so einen schönen Spruch.
There's a saying, living in East Germany was like driving with the handbrake on. I felt that very much. You weren't allowed to do things independently. You always had to file a motion and wait for approval.
Einen Antrag stellen muss und auf eine Genehmigung wartet.
That was the summer of '85. We'd just fallen in love. We'd known each other 3 months and we dared go on holiday together.
Und haben es gewagt, zusammen in Urlaub zu fahren. Jetzt geht die Präsentation der Souvenirs in meiner Berlin.
Here we're in my flat in Berlin showing off the holiday souvenirs. You can see how much we fancied each other.
Andreas fand mich wunderschön und ich fand ihn wunderschön.
Das war unsere wunderbare Duschvorrichtung. Also das haben wir ja lange gebastelt.
This was our wonderful shower device. We did it ourselves.
Wasserhahn rein, der musste auch genau passen.
It had a very thin hose which fitted the water tap. We would put a bowl in there and sit in that bowl one at a time.
Hier hatten wir schon unsere kleine Tochter und wir wohnten zusammen in Babelsberg, auch in einer ganz kleinen Wohnung.
Our daughter was already born and we lived in a very small flat where rain would drip from the roof and rats would gnaw away at our vegetables.
Also schon sehr, sehr schlimm eigentlich da.
Actually, it was horrible.
Es versucht eben
Increasingly, official rallies like this one held little appeal for young East Germans like Andreas and Carmen. A spirit of rebellion was gradually emerging. sometimes in the most surprising places.
Für eine bessere Zukunft richten wir die Heimat auf.
Ich hab mich verlaufen, die Stadt ist so groß.
The often grim reality of living in East Germany was something Michael Schmidt, a children's film animator, wanted to feature in his work.
Oh, das ging.
Wollte ich das auch machen und wollte da auch
I wanted to represent a bit of East German reality. That is, I wanted to show houses with crumbling plaster and broken gutters.
ist oder wo die Dachrinne kaputt ist.
Der Volkspoliz ist, der es gut mit uns meint.
Von der Leitung des
But I was told it was too realistic, so my film was rejected.
Realismus hatte in dem Film.
Michael responded by secretly making an erotic version.
Und das Lied sagt nun jetzt, der Volkspolizist
The policeman shows the girl how to get to the park,
den Weg und hilft ihnen über die Straße und er zeigt nun jetzt dem schon Erwachsenen,
where he wants to seduce her.
Park ist. Also er will dieses Mädchen verführen sozusagen. Also der Karl Marx, der ist erstmal unbeteiligt. Man denkt erstmal, das ist so eine
At first, the Karl Marx monument remains impassive to the tearing up of the rulebook.
Aber er schaut schon mal rüber. Man sieht, dass die
But then his eyes start roving and you realize that after all, the monument is alive.
Es ist doch Leben in diesem absolut
A little bump comes out of the pedestal as he follows the action with his eyes and takes in the girl.
Und dann, als er auch das Mädchen sieht, da kriegt er eine kleine Beule am Sockel.
That's when you realize that even the great Karl Marx has urges.
Dieser große Karl Marx hat auch Gefühle sozusagen in dem Moment. Eine Person, die heilig war damals, ne, und die man ja eigentlich absolut nicht verulgen konnte.
This man was sacrosanct, and at that time it was not allowed to make fun of him.
Man hatte ja damals auch schon so, es war so die Zeit, wo Gorbatschow schon anfing.
But Gorbachev was already in charge, and people started to think of Marx as old-fashioned.
Schon so ein bisschen belächelt, ne? Also man war ja nicht mehr so.
People knew that many things Marx had written in his Bible didn't work. That is, communism as it was envisaged.
Kommunismus, wie man sich ihn vorstellte.
By now, even the Sandman was harboring illegal thoughts. This episode proved controversial, as paragliders were banned in East Germany to prevent people using them to escape across the border. And it is the border, and especially the wall, that remains the symbol of East Germany, shutting its citizens in and dividing families. Jutta Gallus-Fleck, with her 2 young daughters, made an unsuccessful escape attempt from East Germany. This led to her family literally being torn apart. Her 2 daughters were forcibly adopted by the state. On average, more than 7 people were imprisoned every day for trying to escape. Jutta was sentenced to 3 years in prison for attempting to flee East Germany.
All I was allowed to keep was one photograph where I was pictured with my girls. But I had to cut my head off from that picture. I had to cut my head off because I wasn't allowed to preserve any identity, just a number.
In their mother's absence, the girls threw themselves into dancing.
Uns wurde jeden Tag in der Schule oder auch
Every day at school we were told how bad capitalism was,
unterstützend gesagt, wie schlecht
and that our mother was a bad person,
und ein schlechter Mensch und
and that she had done wrong.
Am Anfang wurde es natürlich, wir waren ja noch kleiner.
Jutta's freedom was eventually bought by West Germany. Over the years, the communist regime made over £1 billion from the trade in selling its own citizens. Once in the West, Jutta campaigned for the release of her 2 children.
I went to Checkpoint Charlie almost every day for 6 months. I'd put my placards on, and looking towards the east, I would say, "They are what I want." Honecker regime, give my daughters back. My children who are in forced adoption and who live in a state children's home, I want to have those children. Give me my children back.
Their only communication was via letters which were censored.
I can say we weren't allowed to draw Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse was Western propaganda. It was forbidden to draw such things.
After 6 years of separation, Jutta was finally reunited with her daughters in August 1988.
That was incredible. No one will ever be able to take that away from me. For us, that day is the day of our personal reunification. I'm very proud of the fact that we managed to make it happen before the wall came down.
By the autumn of 1989, discontent with the regime was growing apace.
That was the big demonstration in Berlin.
Curiously, it wasn't about getting rid of East Germany. That was not the issue. And neither was the reunification of Germany. It was about reforming our country. Back then, we still believed it would be possible to create another type of socialism. Now you see flowers attached to a police car. The security forces kept well back.
Unlimited freedom of travel was a very important demand. And when we got it, we lost many other things.
Many East Germans, like Carmen and Andreas, miss aspects of their socialist state. Guaranteed employment, generous welfare benefits, and a certain camaraderie are often cited as examples of what was lost when the Berlin Wall came down.
Actually, we used to lead a good life. There were many things in East Germany that disturbed us and made us angry, and I'm glad they don't exist anymore. But nevertheless, we had a good life in many ways.
Geht einmal zu Ende.
East Germany was a child of the Cold War, and its end came with the end of the Soviet Empire 2 decades ago. Given the revelations that have emerged since, from places like the Stasi files, it is perhaps surprising that anyone should feel nostalgic about it. Yet the country lasted for 40 years, long enough to produce a new kind of society. A socialist paradise it wasn't. But while few want communist East Germany back, some genuinely miss aspects of their lives there. Next time, the lost world of Czechoslovakia, where communism tried to reform itself and failed, consigning people to an era of forgetting. Mass games at the Strahov Stadium, Prague, in communist Czechoslovakia. Here, in the heart of Europe, Czechs and Slovaks were part of an experiment to change the world. The communists sought a new kind of society and a new kind of human being. They sought to erase the past and reprogram the nation's memory. Popular attempts to reform the system were brutally crushed in an invasion by Warsaw Pact allies. Czechoslovakia became known as the Kingdom of Forgetting. Yet dissent persisted, especially among artists and intellectuals. Now, with the help of Rarely Seen Archive, those who lived through these extraordinary times tell their stories of life behind the Iron Curtain. This is one of the most popular films of all time from communist Czechoslovakia, a musical parody of the American West and American big business. A teetotaling gunman, Lemonade Joe, arrives in Stetson City to convert its townsfolk from whiskey to his soft drink, Cola Loca.
A glass of Cola Loca, I was supposed to say in a tenor's voice.
Mój Boże, ta se loka.
We couldn't say the name Coca-Cola in the movie because the company would probably object. So we used an anagram, Cola Loca. It was criticizing different aspects of American life and culture. The spaghetti westerns also derived from Lemonade Joe. Ours was one of the first attempts to make fun of the American West in this way.
The film may have been fascinated by the American West, but many of those involved in making it, like Lemonade Joe himself, felt ties with the communist East.
I was brought up in a family where my father, a chimney sweep, felt that he belonged to the workers. So of course he supported their party, the Communist Party, and what they were doing. I felt the same. I became a member of the Communist Party too.
A Communist Party rally in Prague in 1948. With 2 million members, it was the largest communist party in Eastern Europe outside the Soviet Union at the time. It was also the largest party in parliament. But the communists did not command a majority there. So in February 1948, they seized power.
I can vividly remember being on campus at my public school in 1948. And there we understood it was a coup. We were under no illusions.
Václav Havel was born a gentleman's son into a family of affluence and influence. By his own admission, he was a well-fed piglet. But his comfortable family life was rudely shaken when the region's strongest democracy was subverted by the communists.
We were a so-called bourgeois family, which meant that immediately after the communists took over, the class struggle started against us. My father owned a restaurant business. The day the communists seized power, I can remember my mother went there to get some meat for us, and she was told she couldn't get it just like that, and that our business was nationalized. The communist regime has affected my whole life. I couldn't study because I was a target of the class struggle. I did manual labor for years. I went into military service. And still today I feel handicapped that I didn't get a proper education.
By 1950, Czechoslovakia was in the grip of a Stalinist terror. The show trials staged here were the largest in Eastern Europe. Almost 250,000 people were convicted and 178 executed for political crimes. Of these, Milada Horakova, a popular social democratic politician, was the only woman officially executed. She had one child, a daughter called Jana, At the time of her mother's arrest and trial on bogus charges of treason and conspiracy, Jana was 16.
No, my jsme neměli dovoleno tam být přítomní.
We were not allowed to be present in court. Definitely not.
Pamatuju si tu zoufalou situaci doma, že když jsme vlastně...
And I remember the desperate situation at home, since we were helpless, and we heard everything on the radio, because it was a public trial.
Jasně, všecko vypočítáno na to,
It was all calculated to create in the nation a sense of terror and fear. Terror and fear.
A strach, a strach, a strach.
Each trial literally had a script which the accused had to follow. After torture, they admitted to their guilt and agreed that their execution was a just punishment. But Milada Horáková refused to play her role.
A jenom vím, že moje matka byla vždy...
My mother was totally unwavering.
Který pronesla a tím...
In her last speech, she said her conscience was utterly clear and that she had not betrayed anything. It was something not one of the rest of those involved in the trial had the courage to do.
Své činy jsem dělala vědomě a chci nést také plnou a veškerou odpovědnost daně a odevzdaně přijmu trest, který bude pro mě nalezen. Jsem prohlásila orgánům státní bezpečnosti, že se trvávám ještě ve svém přesvědčení.
This photo shows the manufactured evidence of her anti-state activity. Incredibly, many Czechs believed the trials were genuine and accepted the verdicts. These photos are of public meetings secretly manipulated by the communists, demanding just and severe punishments of these subversive criminals.
Obžalovaní. Doktorka Milada Horáková, rozená Králová, narozená 25. prosince 1901, úřednice a bývalá poslankyně posledně bytem a vešli s cizí mocí a s cizími činiteli ve styk jednak přímý, jednak nepřímý, přičemž doktorka Milada Horáková k trestu smrti
The worst moment was the last visit on the eve of her execution.
To bylo opravdu
That was a very, very bad moment.
Zlá chvíle. Byla absolutně...
She was absolutely calm, composed. We were not allowed even to kiss each other. There were armed guards standing around us, and she did not stop speaking.
Ona celou dobu.
And suddenly she ended the visit herself.
To bylo vše, na co
It was horrendous.
Bylo to hrůzný.
Only 40 years later, after the end of communist rule, did Jana receive the letter her mother had written to her from prison while awaiting execution.
A tak, dceruško jediná,
My only daughter, my girl Jana, the embodiment of my hopes. Live, grasp life with both your hands, to your last breath. I shall pray for your happiness, my dear child. I kiss your hair, eyes, mouth. I caress you and hold you in my arms.
Mé drahé dítě. Líbám tvé vlásky, oči a ústa.
You, whom I have held so little.
A chovám ve svém náručí.
I shall always be with you.
Skutečně tebe nachovala.
And by you.
Vždycky budu s tebou a u tebe.
Excuse me.
Já ten dopis dost často nemůžu
I can't read that letter very often. It still gives me problems even over half a century later.
At 5:38 in the morning on June the 27th, 1950, Milada Horakova was hanged in the grounds of Prague's Pankrak prison. But for many, belief in the regime was not undermined by such events. Two years later, this feature film, part documentary, part drama, was released. It promotes the idea of creating large state-run farms known as collectives. It was directed by Wojciech Jasny, then a party member.
I believed in communism then. One day I said, let's go to this village. They are founding the first agricultural collective there. We will make a film about that. We filmed among farmers in Wiennici. They were poor and happy that the cooperative was there.
Maria Koshnerova was a member of the newly formed collective who appeared in the film.
The collective was a kind of salvation for me. Before then, we sowed wheat and picked thistles by hand. I had to cut everything with a scythe. There was no combine harvester. I had had enough of hard work raising cattle. But when the collective started, everybody was better off. Everybody. We would take milk from work, plus everyone had a cow at home. When I went to the fields, the women used to say, "Ah, there is our sunshine," because I liked to smile. Back then, a worker had his say. Today, nothing is done for the workers. Tell me what they do for them. Nothing. I had no idea what was going on in politics. But I was a member of the Communist Party. I have to tell you, I didn't understand it much. The filmmakers drove us to the May Day events in Prague. They put us in the parade and off we went.
Ultimately, the Communist Party called the tune on what went into the film.
Suddenly, the party called me. I was told that in the film I had to feature Soviet collective farms. Stalin, kulaks, rich farmers. And I couldn't make it unless I did all that.
Nebude u nás socialismu bez přechodu vesnice socialismu.
Maria still retains her enthusiasm for an ideology which markedly improved her way of life.
We sat on the decorated floats after the harvest and they were filming us. The floats wouldn't have been decorated if they hadn't been filming. I miss everything. We had such a good collective. We were such a great team.
Yet during that Stalinist period, the film's director wasn't allowed to feature the brutal, sometimes lethal power used to enforce communism in the countryside.
Ptáte se, co Bejlovec? Ten už zapomněl na svou odhlášku.
A pak jsem řekl, no tak, když jsme to dělali ten film.
When I returned to the village many years later, I asked, so were we sons of bitches to make that film, or weren't we? The answer is we weren't in our souls, but we had to compromise as there was no other way. I was a party member and didn't want to get into trouble.
Sukcesisty
Life under communism in the village of Prepichy in southern Bohemia is captured in this footage. It is part of a 30-year film chronicle of the village, shot by this local baker and his friends.
I bought a camera and started filming for myself. I filmed the bakery at home. And then I started filming for the whole village, so that others would get enjoyment out of my films. We filmed weddings and christenings and such, because about half the people here still went to church. I filmed May Day as well. Of course, you know, everyone was forced to go to the May Day parade. The communists made a big mistake in taking the land from the people by force. By doing that, people lost their incentive to work and only did what they had to do to avoid getting into trouble. And you could see that when we were filming. They didn't like doing it. There were some people who were naive. They really saw a better life for the worker under communism. Half the population here were workers, and they were disappointed that it turned out differently. There were others who saw they could exploit communism for their own advantage. They quickly jumped on the bandwagon. But the largest grouping in our village were those opposed to communism. And when they saw where it was heading, they became scared. There was so much hypocrisy. People said one thing at home and another in public. Communism was a lie, and on that lie they built a whole way of living.
To close that gap between rhetoric and reality, in 1968 the party chose a new leader, Alexander Dubček. He introduced a liberal brand of politics, which he called socialism with a human face. While the Communist Party would still remain in charge, there would be much greater freedom. Censorship was abolished. People could travel abroad, and elements of the market economy were introduced. The reforms made during a period known as the Prague Spring were hugely popular inside Czechoslovakia.
Dubček joined us in the Prague Spring. We wanted to be independent and not do what the Soviet Union was telling us to do. That would have been wonderful, and Europe would have been different.
Wojciech Jasny's previously banned film script on the real story of collectivization was now given the go-ahead.
Dubček called me personally and said, "Now you can make the film. Nobody will oppose it. Do the best you can. You will get the necessary finance." So thanks to him, I could make the film. I called the film All My Good Countrymen, and I meant all of them, on the left, and right. I dared to be myself and tell the whole truth. What I wanted to show in the film was how the harmony in the countryside was disturbed. I'm not against collectives, but here it was done violently. They killed a lot of people.
To zná, jenom duše příbuzná s nebývalou ochotou.
Marta Kubisheva was the pop star of her generation.
Měla jsem s ním debatu, v ní mě pozval na chatu.
She embodied the new energy and freedoms enjoyed during the Prague Spring.
Proč nás týden rozdělí?
On the night of August the 20th, 1968, these changes finally proved too much for Czechoslovakia's communist allies.
My mother flung open the doors to my room at about 3 o'clock in the morning. My 2 poodles came running through the door and threw themselves straight at my face, as they usually did, and my mother said, "Marta, we've been invaded." I wondered why my mother was so upset, because I could see she was really very annoyed. If we're invaded by the Americans, what's the problem? What's the big deal? The Americans are here.
Já nevím, proč mě napadlo, že jedině Američani nás můžou...
I don't know why it occurred to me that only the Americans could occupy our country. That thinking was instilled by communist education.
Intelektuálnějších rodin jsou vždycky jaksi levýho smýšlení.
In my wildest dreams, I couldn't imagine that the Russians were capable of making this mistake.
Nejskrytějším koutku duše nedovedla představit, že by ty Rusové tu chybu.
Yet they did it.
A oni ji udělali.
Operation Danube had begun. The first of up to 500,000 troops of the Warsaw Pact had invaded the country. They claimed they were defending socialism from Dubček's counter-revolution.
I was with my wife and friends in Liberec in the north of the country.
V severních Čechách, kde jsme byli návštěvou u našich libereckých přátel a někdy v 11 večer někdo telefonoval, ať si zapneme rádio.
Around 11 o'clock in the evening, someone rang telling us to switch on the radio.
A tak jsme vyběhli ven a tam už měli tanky.
They were announcing that the Warsaw Pact armies were crossing the borders. We ran out and we could hear the tanks in the streets at once. And we joined the resistance protesting against the occupation.
You are listening to the legal free radio station Hradec Králové, Czechoslovakia. We appeal to all radio stations in Romania, Yugoslavia. Please inform about the situation in the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic. Please transmit all calls in Romanian, French, English, please. Let the whole world know the truth.
The worst thing in Liberec was that people were killed. The tanks came into the main square. I was there watching it. I saw a house collapse. Then a commander from one of the tanks started to shoot all around, and there were more killed.
During the occupation, Marta Kubisheva secretly records the song which becomes the anthem for opposition to the invasion, a prayer for Marta.
Ať mír dál zůstává s touto krajinou. Zloba, závist, zášť, strach a svár, ty ať pominou, ať už pominou.
Teď, když tvá ztracená vláda věcí tvých zpět se k tobě navrátí, lidé navrátí. Z oblohy mrak zvolna odplouvá.
Ta televize se stěhovala podle toho, jak bylo potřeba.
The TV broadcasting studio kept moving to avoid the Russians.
Na Novodvorský to byl nějaký ústav.
We recorded the song in some kind of research institute, to which we were led clandestinely through holes in the fence.
Takhle, aby se nevědělo, že tam jsme.
Nespálil jak květy mráz, jak mráz.
Opravdu klepal hlas, jsem měla co dělat prostě.
My voice was trembling and I had to do my utmost to control my breathing because I knew a Russian helicopter was hovering above us.
Nějaký vrtulník.
Zloba, závist, zášť, strach a svár, ty ať pominou, ať už pominou.
Pak si pamatuju, že jsme odtud jeli.
I remember we came from the recording and since martial law was already in place, an armed Russian soldier pulled us out of the car.
Z auta a opravdu na nás celou dobu mířili a prohlíželi auto. Jenomže já jsem ten pásek měla tadyhle.
All the time their guns were aimed at us. I had the recorded tape here and the cameraman hid his camera under the front seat and they didn't find it. They opened the car boot and found nothing.
Tam nebylo nic, co by je zajímalo. A co by, tak nás teda zase kvérem prostě nechal.
It lasted only a short time, but as I looked down on Prague, I thought, pity Prague is so beautiful, because in a moment I shall be shot dead by some unknown dimwit with a Kalashnikov.
Kalashnikovem, no.
The invasion put an end to hopes of communism reforming itself. In all, about 100 people died, and about 400 had serious injuries. On the return of Alexander Dubček, the architect of socialism with a human face, from his abduction to Moscow, Marta offered him her very public support.
I said to myself, I'm going to give Mr. Dubček all the roses and a lucky medallion of an angel that I had in a box. When I suddenly saw Dubček, I knew him only from the TV screen. I threw myself at him. He wore the angel on his wrist the following day.
Jako to mi maminka řekla, protože maminka to viděla. No tak takovýmhle trapasem.
And this made me famous.
Stala slavnou, protože já jsem ho opravdu měla.
So it was symbolic love.
Jak se tomu říká, když někdo někoho miluje symbolicky?
For her support for Dubček, Marta's voice was silenced for 19 years, and she was forced to take a series of menial jobs. The process of reversing the reforms and removing the reformers, including Dubček, was called normalization.
V lednu 70 mě zakázali.
I was banned from singing in January 1970.
Paní Kubišová, buďte rozumná, jde jenom o vyjádření podpory tomu.
The new regime kept saying that all they were asking me to do was to express my support for the normalization process.
Ten jeho projev v dubnu roku 69 jsem viděla a to mě připadalo.
But I couldn't do that because I realized that the Iron Curtain was being reinforced with a layer of concrete.
Utužila, že se teda železná opona, to jsem si říkal, to je betonová železná. Ale
I knew the skies over Czechoslovakia had darkened.
Teda nad Československem tehdy.
It was the funeral of Jan Palach, a student who had set himself on fire in protest at the invasion, which symbolized the grief of a nation. This footage of the funeral was shot by Stanislav Milota, a feature film cameraman.
I filmed all of Palach's funeral from the start until they put him in the grave. It was an incredible experience being with the people. Suddenly I felt proud to live among them. It was a once-in-a-lifetime feeling.
The police hunted for the footage which Milota smuggled out of the country. But with hardline communists back in charge of Czechoslovakia, filming such events did not go unpunished.
I got a letter stating that I was among the main participants in filming the events directed against the party, and therefore I couldn't continue as a cameraman, and I couldn't do anything else either. When I discovered the world of film, I knew it was the love of my life. So when you lose all that, it's as if someone close to you dies.
In the weeks and months that followed Palach's funeral, around 500,000 lost their jobs and became non-persons. The Communist Party purged its ranks of 500,000 members. Others resigned.
I stayed in the party until 1968, when I grew brave enough. And there were my colleagues, directors and producers, sitting before the party organization, whose members were crossing out and ticking names. I said, enough. I took my party card and threw it at their feet. And since then, I haven't wanted to have anything to do with communism.
After the Soviet occupation, our bosses wanted to destroy the negative and all copies of All My Good Countrymen. They just wanted to burn it.
All My Good Countrymen was banned forever by the Communist Party. Its director was ordered to denounce the film publicly. But he chose to follow over 100,000 fellow Czechoslovaks into exile.
My boss at the film studio said, Wojciech, I can't protect you anymore. That's out of the question. You will start to collaborate or you will go to prison. You will express support for the Soviet invasion. You will retract everything. You will say, All My Good Countrymen is your worst movie, in the press, on radio and TV. That meant my moral death. You had to leave if you didn't want to die morally, which is worse than dying physically.
Ostrava, the coal and steel heartland of the communist utopia. The city, its environment and its people have been the subject of Victor Kolar's photographs all his working life. But after 1968, Victor's pictures document what became known as the era of forgetting. Conformity replaces belief. Instead of hope, there is cynicism.
I found that the people were different. The aspect of fear, that grey look, the deadening of people's energies, the stagnation in people's lives. The fact that intelligence was pushed into a corner, I saw all these things. I saw these anonymous people who came there and sat down, ornamental bows on the handrails to cover the rust. And the guy who's hidden behind the decorations, but who has a comic suit, sneakers, and a hat which is covering his eyes. In this picture, I captured what I thought was the atmosphere during normalization. A park, uncared for surroundings, the routine of people going to work. The young man, a bit like John Travolta in a leather jacket. The older worker. The soldier leaning against a tree, which could mean hopelessness. The routine, the ossification. It was a moment when the essence of a whole way of life is revealed.
Přichází Marie teď, prosím tě, teď děláš výborný. Marie!
No, už jsem tady.
Humour also provided a different perspective on life under communism. Jaroslav Dolecek, an economist at a collective farm, made comedy films that exposed the gap between socialist rhetoric and reality.
I was making fun of them and they realized that.
U mě to přecházelo v satiru, poněvadž něco se mě zajímalo.
I made fun of things that interested me in everyday life, and I turned it into satire.
Z toho musím udělat prču, že? No tak jsem tam něco maličko dokreslil.
His targets included collective farms, the black economy, and political apparatchiks. But making fun of the communists carried a personal price tag for Dolecek.
Jeden můj kluk chtěl na školu.
One of my sons wanted to study at university, but they refused to accept him.
Chtěl jít na školu, no a najednou jsem se dozvěděl, že není.
There was a note which said the reason was because his father made anti-Soviet films.
Proti-sovětské filmy.
A bribe to a senior communist official was now required to reverse this situation.
Tak jsme se dohodli, já říkám, no a...
I came to an agreement with this party boss.
Jak to budeme platit? Jak to chci zaplatit? On říká, no
I asked him how much he wanted to be paid.
Tam dělají ty krajky.
He said, you are from Bamberg. You make lace there. Beautiful lace. And my daughter is getting married. So why don't you pay for her lace dress?
Mě to stálo tenkrát, já nevím.
I said, okay.
Mě to stálo asi ke 3 000. No a...
And so my son went to university.
Tam ten ucel, ještě, že mě nerozumí.
Others weren't so easily able to resolve their differences with the communist authorities. The hit TV series of this era of forgetting was a communist cop show called Major Zeman, produced under the auspices of the Ministry of the Interior. This episode about terrorist musicians was inspired by a rock group who were to change Czech history, the Plastic People of the Universe.
Tak mi dej hlášku ještě zas jednou opustí. Ruce vzhůru! A obrať to! Do výchova!
To perform in public, the Plastics had to audition for a license.
Pak jsme se dozvěděli, že tam nějaký úředník...
One of the officials said, cut their hair, send them down the mines, or send them to jail.
...případně zavřít.
After 2 weeks, we received a letter from the Cultural Centre in Prague stating they couldn't license us due to the negative impact of our music. They said our lyrics were morbid. In fact, I think they were just looking for an excuse.
The Plastics continued performing in unlicensed concerts at unofficial venues. It was hippies versus the communist state. After 2 years of constant harassment, they were arrested in September 1976 on charges of organized disturbance of the peace.
They took us to a grave-like basement. It was very depressing. When they lock you in here, the feeling is horrible at first. You don't know how long you'll stay here and think about everything you've screwed up. I was released after 5 months without a trial. Only those in the band who had gone to university were given a jail sentence.
The Plastics were arrested not because they were performing against the government and against the regime, but simply because they behaved the way they wanted to. And the communists hated that.
Václav samozřejmě se o to zajímal, co se tady děje hodně, že jo.
Václav was very interested in what was going on with us.
Takže to zajímalo a tím, že vlastně jsme byli zavření.
When we were in jail, he collected signatures for a petition, even from abroad.
Těch spisovatelů a tak dále.
A vytvořila se taková atmosféra, že se zdálo, že
And then we got the idea to create something more permanent and not just to concentrate on this one court case.
Konkrétnímu soudu a
in that atmosphere, Charter 77 was born.
V této atmosféře se zrodila tedy Charta 77.
On January the 1st, 1977, a Charter for Human Rights in Czechoslovakia was published and a dissident movement founded.
Sure, plastic people contributed to the foundation of the Charter.
Karel Gott is one musician the communist regime wanted on their side. He is the biggest star ever to come out of Czechoslovakia.
Only you will shout the peace inside. Only you. Kdy jsem tě získal.
During the era of forgetting, he claimed he made the country more money than Skoda cars.
In those days, yes. I think I made the communist regime around 100 million Deutschmark. 100 million, more than a factory.
Do které ovšem se musí na rozdíl od dvou hlasivek investovat spousta materiálu.
Unlike my two vocal cords, however, they had to invest money and a lot of work and buy materials to build a factory.
Proti něčemu ty devizy získat, aby tu fabriku mohli postavit. Já nechci růže na nebe, já nechci pláč, já chci jen zpět a do hrobu mě dejte píseň. Já jsem v těch 70. a 80. letech
In the 1970s and 80s, I had become so popular, not only in the West and here, but also in the vast Soviet Union.
Nejenom u nás, ale i v tom obrovském sovětském svazu.
Millions of people supported me, and those above me were thinking, what do we do with a singer who is so successful? We cannot do anything with him. We've lost control over him. They could do two things. They could arrest me or reward me. And they awarded me. They decided it would be better if I could bring them in foreign currency.
Gott received several awards from the communist regime, but their approval carried a price tag. In 1978, he signed a so-called anti-charter against Havel's organization, although he says he didn't understand what he was signing.
Já jsem nepodepsal antikartu.
I didn't sign the anti-charter. They didn't tell me it was an anti-charter. I thought it was an attendance list.
Jenomže, a teď už jsme u té cílené...
But they want to portray me as the communist regime's singer who protests against the charter.
Zpěváka režimu, který protestuje proti té chartě. Kdyby tam byla politika, tak...
If I had brought my politics into my performances, I would have had to express clearly which side I was on. And if I had stood against the system, I would have been finished as a singer. Naturally, I don't have to prove I'm doing well all the time. You can see I'm doing well. To have this terrace overlooking Prague, this is proof that I've been successful.
Rewards for some, but increasingly reprisals for those who openly challenged the communists.
That special house, what you see now, it isn't the dream of Corbusier, but I think more dream of George Orwell, because it is a house of police which it built 3 months ago, and the whole day, every day, they live inside and they follow all my steps and everything what I do in my country house. Sometimes they are here also during the night, but mainly only during the day. They are my new neighbors. I'm sorry for that short interruption, but police car drive around our house, and we are a little bit afraid that they see us. A byli kolem domu a jednou sem, a to bylo právě, myslím...
The police were all around my house, and there was a policeman in uniform who kept following me all the time and was always a meter behind me. And once I decided to walk the dog round and round the garden, and he was following me, of course, round and round too. And a friend of mine filmed that for the BBC.
Zkrátka a dobře, měl jsem takzvanou ostrahu, že což byl odkrytý.
They weren't spying on me secretly. It was quite blatant, the surveillance and restriction of my freedom of movement.
Hlídání člověka, omezování jeho svobody pohybu a podobně.
Sometimes I really couldn't leave the house. I couldn't even go shopping for groceries.
Ani na nákup jsem nesměl, potraviny mi házeli přátelé oknem, že dnes, když to...
Today that might seem funny, but back then it wasn't pleasant at all.
Nebylo to příjemné.
Later that year, Havel was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment for sedition. As this Dolochek film illustrates, repression and surveillance became a way of life for some. For those outside the dissident circle, it was a question of learning to live between the gaps in the regime. At work, cynicism and decline characterized communism's final 2 decades in Czechoslovakia. The attitude of we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us became increasingly prevalent. Although some workers remained ideologically committed.
This is the gold star of the hero of socialist labor. It's the climax and a reward for my lifelong work, the highest Czechoslovak civic decoration. It was presented by Konrad Husák, our president. An unforgettable experience. I felt like a hero then, and I feel like a hero today.
As a star worker in the coal mining industry, Rudolf Vasilcho enjoyed a good, well-paid life under communism.
At that time, the only place to make money was in mining. It was 3, 4, even 5 times more than the normal salary of a factory worker. We could have bought anything we wanted. Many times we made the money, but there were very few goods in the shops. The team that I led broke 4 Czechoslovak records and made 72 increases in speed. We wanted to make more money and to fulfill the plan for construction output. If an enterprise did not fulfill the plan, it meant catastrophe for everyone. Everything I've achieved has been helped by the Communist Party. And that is where I will stay. I will not change my coat.
Prague's enormous Strahov Stadium. Every 5 years, 16,000 athletes performed a display of mass gymnastics before over 100,000 spectators. It's called Spartakiada. Such displays demonstrate a communist reshaping of history, as a national tradition is adapted for political ends.
Spartakiada was an attempt to present communism as an enormous force that influences everything, is hugely important and takes care of the people. We knew for certain that the communists were abusing our games. They were abusing us, the work of ordinary people, in order to boast of the achievements of a socialist physical education. But I'll say it in a slightly vulgar way. We gymnasts didn't give a damn. The gymnasts wanted to be there and wanted to perform. They had the most beautiful experience of their lives.
Yarina Zhitna's most famous piece of gymnastic choreography, The Buds, became a national sensation and hit polka disco number.
The costumes, the weather, the girls, the Buds performance came off perfectly in all respects. It always fills you with joy. I was on the captain's bridge directing things, counting 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the sense of fraternity was terrific. It's true that for those who were deeply harmed by the communist regime, we were contributing to the glory and honor of that regime.
I never took part in a Spartakiada. I never went to one. I saw it as an expression of megalomania.
But there were to be no more Spartakiadas to satirize. In November 1989, the Czechoslovak people, following the collapse of the Berlin Wall, took to the streets. It was people power against the communist regime, and the people won. During this bloodless velvet revolution, the forgotten voices could be heard. After almost 20 years of enforced silence, Marta Kubisheva sang in public again.
They pushed me out onto a balcony saying, "Just a little prayer we need here, Marta." I thought, geez, now what do I do? I forgot the words completely, but when I looked down and saw all those people, I thought, no singer ever had this kind of comeback. That was the moment when people started to cry.
Czechoslovakia's leading dissident became its first freely elected head of state in over 40 years, as communist rule, but not its impact, came to an end.
A climate of moral devastation was created, which we will be dealing with for a long time to come. 2 new generations will have to grow up before the footprints of communism are washed away.
Communism's attempts to reshape history and to reform itself both failed. At the end, the people rejected every face of socialism. Yet the legacy of 40 years of communism persists, and memories are still fresh in the kingdom of forgetting. Next time, the lost world of communist Romania, where Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu created socialism in one family before meeting their end in front of a firing squad. This is the story of a happily married couple, Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu, who together ruled Romania for nearly a quarter of a century. Romanians sarcastically called this socialism in one family. The concentration of power in their hands and the cult of personality which surrounded them was quite different from the other communist countries in Europe. Even the private lives of Romanians were targeted by the Ceausescus. Both contraception and abortion were banned. Any signs of rebellion or defiance were ruthlessly silenced. When communism collapsed, the Ceausescus were the only leaders to meet the fate of tyrants. Down one of the walkways in Bucharest's main cemetery is the modest resting place of the man who relentlessly moulded the lives of a whole generation. In view of the hatred he inspired, it is perhaps surprising that his grave is well maintained, and that Ceausescu even inspires some respect 20 years later, for a few at least.
I come to Ceausescu's grave every Saturday because thanks to him, I have a house, I had a job, I didn't lack anything. It was inconceivable that I shouldn't have food on the table. Although I raised 2 children on my own, they had all they needed.
Ceausescu's popularity began here on the balcony of what was then the Communist Party headquarters. A few years after he came to power, Ceausescu had the courage to criticize the Soviet Union and the other satellite states for invading Czechoslovakia. Never before had a satellite leader criticized the Soviets so publicly.
Cetățeni ai țării românești, pătrunderea trupelor celor 5 țări socialiste în Ceoslovacia constituie o mare greșeală și o primejdie gravă pentru pacea în Europa, pentru soarta socialismului în lume.
By proclaiming Romania's independence from Soviet domination, Ceausescu aroused Romanian nationalism. Nicolae Melinescu was in the crowd.
It was a very emotional speech, and at that time, if Ceausescu came down into the street, he would have been regarded as a national hero, and I think people would have kissed him.
Ceausescu's popularity was to decline, but his power did not. Indeed, it grew, and was sustained by a cult of personality which had both narcissistic and monarchic overtones. As head of state, head of the armed forces, and head of the Communist Party, Ceausescu exercised incredible power. But it was a power he shared with his wife. It was a power which was used to interfere in any aspect of a citizen's life. And that even included intruding into the home life of a senior party man like Joe Pop. He and his wife Nadia were privileged enough to have their own movie camera and projector. The Pops already had the camera when their first child was born.
Her name is Indira.
Indira se cheamă.
We'd just come from the maternity ward.
These are her first days after we brought her home.
She was so pretty. Her eyes were so blue and a little red mouth. Here she was less than 2 weeks old.
As a party member, Joe should not have married Nadia at all. He was a communist and the son of a peasant. She was from the former ruling elite, and therefore a class enemy who had lost all privileges. From Nadia's point of view, marriage to Joe was a lifeline.
Because in those days, members of the Communist Party were the only people with a good future. They were among the few who could have a career, live a better life, and avoid doing manual work.
Joe and Nadia married secretly. There are no wedding pictures.
Din această cauză, după ce m-am însurat și am anunțat...
That's why after I got married and told them who I'd married, I had problems.
V-am povestit că am fost chemat la Comitetul Central de un secretar al Comitetului.
I was called to the Central Committee by a senior party figure who insulted me.
M-a insultat.
She asked me how I dare to marry without asking for their approval.
Să mă căsătoresc fără să le cer lor consimțământul.
Communists were atheists, so Joe should not have had his daughter baptized.
If they'd found out at work that we baptized our girl, they'd have fired my husband.
Their daughter was baptized secretly, and the celebration which followed was held away from prying eyes.
Este sărbătorirea botezului.
We celebrated at home because I had a high-ranking position in the party.
Eu având o muncă de răspundere pe acea vreme.
We couldn't celebrate publicly, for example in a restaurant or a church.
Nici la restaurant, nici la biserică, nici nicăieri.
Ceausescu celebrates the birth of the 20 millionth Romanian. He was obsessed with increasing the population to provide manpower for his new industries. So in 1966, he banned abortion for all women except for those who already had 4 children. Any mother caught having an abortion was jailed, as was the abortionist. These were serious penalties, as crucially contraception was banned as well. One way to stop abortion was regularly to check all females of childbearing age to see if they were pregnant. This was done in some high schools. A very unworldly Daniela Dragici remembers the first time a gynecologist examined her.
We didn't really know what he wanted from us, but there were rumors going on,
And we knew he was looking at a certain part of our body that no one had ever looked at before. We were scared. We were afraid of what they might say, they might write down after that kind of examination, of what they might tell our parents. We didn't even know how you got pregnant at that time. Maybe we had kissed, and maybe you could get pregnant like that. There were rumors that if you kissed, you could get pregnant.
But once she learnt the facts of life, Daniela quickly learnt what a nightmare the ban on abortion and contraception was.
You couldn't have fun having sex while you were afraid. Everybody was afraid, particularly the girls. The boys maybe didn't care that much. They were not the ones who would have to get an abortion, so they didn't really feel what we felt. The girls really were scared, and they were not confident at all, even when having sex, and withdrawal was the method, because we couldn't control it.
For most families, and particularly for poor couples like the Niagus, who already had 3 children, Ceausescu's law was terrible.
He wanted people to have as many children as possible, to torment them because people had no means to raise them. There wasn't enough food, housing was scarce, and people lived 3 or 4 in one room.
Ceausescu later ruled that women working in factories should be inspected every month to see if they were pregnant, thus making abortions virtually impossible. Paraskiva remembers the inspections.
I was ashamed, but what could I do? I was ordered to get undressed. The nurses were rude. And the doctor would shout too if he didn't like how I lay on the table, if it was difficult for him to examine me. The doctors were patronizing and put me down. They called me stupid. They told me I behaved as if I'd been born in a barn.
Townswomen who wanted abortions often used peasant women, and peasant women who wanted abortions often did their own. Anuta Timish carried out 3 such abortions.
I used a medical instrument like an aerial made of stainless steel. Well, I put a serum for injections and a little bit of medical alcohol into the instrument, and I put it in my uterus. That was all. It took about a week, and during that week all the fluid bled out. There was some pain, of course, but it came out.
And what did you do with it?
I buried it. What else could I do? I buried the fetuses by the electricity pole in my backyard. Nobody could look there. Nobody knew about it. Who was to know?
Anuta says all the women in her village did their own abortions. Back in Bucharest, Nadia Pop didn't want any more children. When she got pregnant again, she thought of doing an abortion on herself when doctors refused to do one for her.
I considered doing it on myself, but then I thought, am I insane? I could be sent to prison, I could die. When I had my earlier abortions, it never occurred to me that I might die. But once I had my girl, I couldn't take that risk because I had to live for her.
It's estimated that over 10,000 women died from botched abortions during the Ceausescu period. Anuta Timish was eventually jailed for helping a neighbor with her abortion. Whilst in prison, Anuta gave birth to a child which she desperately wanted to keep.
3 weeks after I had my baby girl, they told me that they'd send me to a women's labour camp. I said, let me see my baby for the last time. And very reluctantly, some policemen made that possible. So I went to see her. I kissed her, and then I left. I never saw her again.
As an illegal abortionist, Anuta would have been deemed unsuitable to be a mother. The Ceausescu family had come a long way from their beginnings in illiterate, dirt-poor, often drunken peasant homes. 27 family members came to hold top positions in party and government. But the head of the family, for all his drive and ruthlessness, had his fair share of hang-ups. One of his closest collaborators was Stefan Andrei.
He was painfully aware that he was short, that he stuttered, that he was ugly. He didn't have any friends, and generally he was always on his guard. His wife played a completely destructive role. She was a mean, backward, shrewd woman who dominated him.
Quite apart from her unique access, Elena acquired real power when she took control of all political appointments within the party.
When someone was due to be named as minister, she'd say, "I don't agree," and her opinion was final. There were many instances when I talked to him, and he would tell me, "Make sure nobody knows," meaning she wasn't to know.
Elena also used to interfere in cultural matters. One target was Stefan Andrei's wife, film star Violeta Andrei.
I just don't understand why she hated me so much. She never even spoke to me.
Elena was apparently jealous of beautiful women. There's also the suggestion that both Ceausescus were prudish.
Before 1972, I appeared in many, many films, both on the small and on the big screen. In these movies, I would show my legs. I would wear low-cut tops. I was shown in the bath, covered in bubbles, in a movie called Felix and Ottilia. This was disturbing for the Ceausescus.
Directors had got wind of Elena's dislike of Violeta's style.
For example, I was starring in a musical, and I was wearing a very revealing bikini. The director asked the costume designer to throw a chiffon top over my swimsuit so it didn't look so revealing. He asked why I wasn't wearing a one-piece swimsuit. I replied that I had never worn one.
Soon after, Violeta was banned from TV and film. Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu were to get some useful lessons on manipulating their own image.
Ceausescu was inspired by the cult of personality, which was a key feature of Kim Il-sung's regime in North Korea. When I visited North Korea myself, I realized how much Ceausescu had been impressed by Kim Il-sung and the way he ran things.
Că de acolo îi vine. Cu perceptele.
They were very good friends, too.
De altfel erau și foarte buni amici.
The Romanian cult of personality portrayed the peasant son alongside the great kings and heroes of the nation's history. His wife was Queen of Romanian science. Not a bad title for someone who had left school at 14 after failing nearly every subject. The popular displays of adoration knew no limit.
Mândre flori vă dorim din razele iubirii, dar științei drum și al împlinirii ne îndrumați să fim cutezători. Iubiți părinți!
Attending these displays was compulsory. 250,000 would take part in the annual Independence Day parade.
One bad thing, you had to wake up very early to walk long distances to get to the gathering point and then march on in front of the leadership of the country. So that was quite unpleasant. On the other hand, it was a sort of a get-together. That was a good part because you met your friends and then get into a park or anywhere else where they had cheap beer, sausages, sandwiches for half a price that they were usually sold for in any other day. It was a sort of a popular festival. It was a huge picnic.
But when Nicolae Melinescu, seen here in the studio, joined Romanian TV News, he discovered that dealing with footage of their leader was no picnic. Certain images were simply banned.
And that meant, let's say, all natural things, gestures that common people do, like blinking, or like stuttering, or wiping your forehead when it was too hot. He had to speak hours and hours on end. He hated air conditioning and he was sweating.
Sometimes cameramen could not avoid getting unsuitable shots. So these pictures of Ceausescu relaxing with party cronies were really not quite right.
He was never shown chewing food or drinking from a glass or a cup of water. Never. Just half the gesture, no? Taking the cup or the glass to his lips.
On one occasion, Melinescu slipped up. We don't have the pictures, but he certainly has the memories.
And the incriminated picture showed everything which shouldn't be shown under no circumstances. Ceausescu, in 2 seconds only, did everything wrong. He stuttered, he blinked, he wiped his nose, he forced his eyes, he was nervous. Something happened during those 2 seconds, and that came onto the screen. And that was disaster. I took the blame, and for about 6 months there was a cut in the salary, and I was put to do the menial jobs of the department.
A tiny minority sought to criticize the leader. One Romanian cartoonist had the courage to lampoon Ceausescu's practice of having streets cleared of traffic so his motorcade would have a clear run.
The tram is in the middle of the road and the policeman's saying, "Pull over to the right and don't answer back. The comrade's convoy is coming."
Mihai Stănescu was even able to show this cartoon publicly. He was the only critical cartoonist allowed to exhibit his work from time to time. One occasion particularly sticks in his mind.
Many were queuing to see my work and didn't dare to laugh. They'd wait until they got outside because they were afraid someone would snitch on them that they had laughed at Stănescu's cartoons.
Stănescu had fought long and hard to be allowed to show his work. But there have been suggestions that it suited the secret police, the Securitate, to tolerate him.
It was a way of controlling people. I'm not saying that Mihai Stănescu was controlling us. Thank God for him and his cartoons. But I think the system also had a way of controlling us through jokes and allowing certain things so we wouldn't just blow up.
Securitate tolerance did not go as far as allowing 2 books of his cartoons to reach the shops. Yet interestingly, some of the Securitate officers kept copies for themselves. Their office was close by. From their windows they could watch him in his studio.
Once they came to my studio and asked me to autograph one of my censored books.
Friday night around without a suitcase. Sunday morning dripping like a...
In the 1960s, a band in the town of Timișoara had made a name for itself by playing British pop music, especially the latest Beatles numbers.
Baby, Madonna, baby at your breast. Wonder how you managed to please the rest.
The leader of the Phoenix band, Nicu Kovač, was a natural member of the Awkward Squad. Typically, he filmed his band traveling upstream, literally. Here was his response to Ceausescu's announcement that all Romanian art may only draw on authentic national folklore.
From now on, we were only allowed to sing in Romanian. Our response was, you want folklore? You'll have folklore.
However, the folklore was combined with rock, and the songs had a strong Robin Hood theme.
We were angry young men, and rock music was our way of expressing our feelings. But as we sang in archaic Romanian, they couldn't compare us with Western bands and accuse us of importing foreign influence.
Normally, the police would confiscate the ID of any teenager with long hair, and only return it when he got his hair cut. But Nicu found a way round this.
To this day, I can't understand how I acquired such a privileged status. When my band members had their IDs confiscated, I used to intervene. I'd go to the police station and have a row with the cops. The result was always the same. They'd hand over the IDs, and our guys' hair stayed long.
Kovač seemed to enjoy some sort of protection from higher up, but it didn't last.
To make sure there was no fighting and that people wouldn't shout forbidden slogans, the Securitate soldiers and police mingled with the audience. There were policemen with dogs outside the stadium as well. All this intimidated the audience and ensured that they showed their appreciation only by applauding.
Soon the Securitate were threatening Kovač.
I was warned, you're in great danger, because it was so easy to end up in a madhouse tied to a bed, with them saying he was taking drugs.
Kovač took the hint. At great risk, he hid his band in loudspeaker boxes and smuggled them out of Romania. Vasily Paraschiv, a working-class man from the town of Ploiești, was one of the very few who challenged Ceausescu openly. Nothing could stop him. In 1971, he sent a list of proposals to the party leadership and to the unions, of which he was a member.
Those 11 proposals stipulated precisely the democratic rights and freedoms that are enjoyed today by the Romanian trade unions.
The response of the Securitate was a series of beatings in secluded places, like this forest near his home.
They beat me. They tortured me. They hit my soles with a rubber stick. They hit my face and my stomach with their fists. And they hit me on the head with bags filled with sand. For 7 days and 7 nights, without water and food.
This didn't stop Paraschiv fighting for union rights. After being attacked again, this time on the staircase outside his flat, he got himself photographed immediately afterwards. But the worst thing that happened to him was being put in psychiatric hospitals 3 times, even though he was perfectly sane.
Ceaușescu la Timișoara a spus că numai un nebun poate.
Ceaușescu had declared that only a madman could disagree with the grand achievements of socialism. And if there were people who disagreed, then they were mad. And the straitjacket was awaiting them.
Paraschiv is one of the few victims of the regime who ever got to confront some of his tormentors. After the revolution, he went back to one of the hospitals where he'd been detained. There he met the hospital's former chief psychiatrist, Dr. Ara Kerestighian.
Bună ziua, domnule doctor. Să trăiți. Mai mă cunoașteți? Da. Luați loc, vă rog. Ce mai faceți?
Dr. Kerestighian insisted that Paraschiv was mentally ill, but admitted that the hospital had been used by the regime to isolate troublemakers.
Securitatea a adus uneori bolnavi în anumite împrejurări, evenimente, bolnavi care s-au internat la noi. Mi s-a părut lucru normal asta? Bolnavi care conturbau liniștea sau ordinea sau deranjau într-un fel sistemul, aduceau, dar care erau bolnavi, nu oameni, care nu oameni sănătoși. Oameni sănătoși nu.
Paraschiv's original admission file stated that he suffered from paranoia. The symptoms included publicizing a series of irresponsible complaints against the authorities, at home and abroad. Paraschiv says his dignity was destroyed in the hospitals.
I would rather have been tried in court and sentenced to years in prison than have my dignity destroyed. Of course, that was the intention of the Securitate. They wanted to convince my workmates that I was not sane and that they should ignore ideas about free trade unions and democratic rights.
If anyone was suffering from paranoia, it was Ceaușescu. Not just about opposition at home, but also about traveling abroad, as his foreign minister, Stefan Andrei, recalls.
As a rule, he didn't eat at official dinners on foreign trips. He had his meals at the embassy, prepared by his own cook. He was accompanied by a chemist who was in charge, among other things, of destroying his excrement so that nobody could examine it to check the state of his health.
Colonel Dimitri Berlan of the Securitate was Ceaușescu's chief bodyguard.
În vizitele respective,
dădea mâna cu cineva.
If during a visit he'd shake hands with a foreigner, particularly if he was from the Third World, there was always in his entourage either an officer or somebody from the Food Safety Agency who had a medical kit containing tissues dipped in alcohol.
O trusă medicală, exista șervețele îmbibate.
And he'd be given one of them
Spirit medicinal.
to wipe his hands.
Ceaușescu și se ștergea pe ele.
Ceausescu's suspicion of foreigners meant that the Securitate had to take a close look at anyone who travelled abroad. As senior party member Joe Pop discovered after he returned from an official trip to New York.
În aprilie 65, când am venit în țară,
When we returned to Romania, the Securitate suspected that we'd been recruited as American spies.
și eu personal venind așa, am fost suspendat.
Even though I was a director working for the Department of International Relations, I was suspended and forbidden to go abroad.
Am fost suspendat și mi s-a interzis să mai plec în străinătate.
But Joe was cleared, his career prospered, and he and Nadia were able to enjoy the slight increase in living standards of the late 60s and early 70s.
Ne cumpărasem o mașină
We'd bought a Yugoslav car, a Sastava. Look,
Here is our little girl again, and our glorious Zastava.
it was good.
Now the Pops could easily get to Nadia's parents in the town of Târgoviște and escape from the ever-present surveillance in Bucharest.
Familia a fost totuși un loc.
Family was where we felt safe,
Singurul loc unde te puteai pe
a place one could take refuge in without fear of being listened to or sneaked on.
S-au spus la cineva.
Neighbours were nosy sometimes.
But Joe was even watched at his in-laws. It turned out that the local Securitate boss knew his mother-in-law.
Și i-a spus,
He told her, if you're under the impression that we don't know what your son-in-law does while he's in Târgoviște, think again. Lucky for him, he's okay. We can't hold anything against him, but we know everything. So they kept me under surveillance all the time.
deci ei tot timpul m-au supravegheat.
Well, actually, the Pops did find some escape from being watched at the seaside.
Și nu era lume.
It wasn't crowded.
It's one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been to. We had so much freedom for the children. It wasn't luxury as in other places, but it was very pleasant.
Aici nu era ta confort, dar era foarte plăcut.
Perhaps the most unexpected targets of the Securitate were the Ceausescu children, all the more so when we consider who authorized the surveillance.
Au fost în mare măsură puși de mama mea să ne supravegheze pe noi toți copiii.
My mother asked the Securitate to keep an eye on us.
Dragoste, se poate spune oricum exagerat.
This might have been from a misguided sense of love, but whatever it was excessive.
Nu putem să facă nimic.
The Securitate couldn't touch us, but the information they gave our mother created a lot of problems for us.
Am avut destule neînțelegeri.
La un moment dat primesc telefon prin stație să mă întrebe unde se găsește.
One day I received a call asking where's Zoya Ceausescu.
Atunci am primit telefonul de la dispecerat.
I reported and then got another call saying that I was to go and fetch Comrade Elena.
Dumnezeu a venit, s-a urcat în mașină și am...
I went to the residence. She got into the car and we went to the Harestro Park in order for her to see what Zoya was doing in the park with her boyfriend.
Cu Petre Roman, cu Petrica. A văzut.
She saw from the car that they were walking, holding hands, or the boyfriend would have his arm around her waist or around her shoulders.
De mijloc sau de după.
We stayed for about 15 minutes.
Am stat circa vreo 10-15 minute.
Elena was to force Zoya to end 2 of her relationships. The Securitati kept close tabs on son Nicu as well. Elena and Nikolai did not approve of the hedonistic lifestyle Nicu enjoyed with his sweetheart, Donka Mizil. In their determination to stop them marrying, Nikolai even broke his own law.
He ended Nicu's long relationship with Donka Mizil. He went so far as to force her to have an abortion. He took the child out of her without her parents' approval and without her approval. It was illegal, of course.
Nikolai and Elena wanted Nicu to go into politics and lined up a budding youth leader for him, Poliana Cristescu. Nicu married her very reluctantly.
După ce a semnat Nicu certificatul de căsătorie,
After he signed the marriage certificate, Nicu said to Poliana, "Now go and live with my mother."
ce acum stai cu mama,
She should shag you because she chose you.
că ea te-a ales.
Few ordinary people could escape the endless surveillance and interference. But Daniela Dragic did manage to create something like an alternative life. After she and her husband were sacked for refusing to translate some government propaganda, she set up a kindergarten.
I had this private English teaching kindergarten in my own apartment. I could make a living. I could do what I wanted. I spoke English with the kids. I lived in a different world. I created a world that was different.
Daniela even organized a birthday party for one of the kindergarten children in the spacious house of a foreign diplomat. She was breaking all the rules. For Romanians, contact with foreign embassy staff or going to their homes was strictly forbidden.
Most people, let's say, survived communism by listening to Radio Free Europe, by having an underground abortion provision network. We would sit together in the kitchen most often, drinking beer, eating sunflower seeds, and talking against the government. And that helped us, exercise, maybe in a way, ourselves, and survive communism and even laugh about it.
Ăsta a fost sifonul. Feul de cristal, Hârlău, 1984.
The dreadfulness of everyday life provided rich material for one student comedy group. They filmed this spoof New Year's broadcast by Romanian TV for their private amusement. But before any public performances, all their sketches had to be approved by the censors.
Deci s-a ajuns la acel nivel de stupidități.
It reached the height of stupidity when the Ministry of Culture and Communist Education, I hope my memory is not betraying me and this was the actual name, had issued a list of forbidden words.
O listă care conținea cuvinte.
These words weren't allowed on stage, in shows, on TV, in newspapers, anywhere else.
În spectacole, la televizor și niciunde.
Chiar în ziar, deci.
În ziare.
Yes, newspapers too.
So these words were forbidden.
Interzis cuvinte.
One forbidden word was dollar. The censors assumed that anyone who used the word must be an enemy of the working class.
One of the jokes was that as we couldn't say the word dollar, we claimed we had bought a piece of machinery with rubles. The censors were outraged by this as well, and wrote on our script, any other currency. And we said exactly that. We bought this piece of machinery for 300, any other currency. The audience burst into hysterical laughter. It was funnier than any other word we could have used.
Because the student audience cottoned onto the fact that we'd been censored. The censor, a really nice guy, didn't want to impose on us the alternative to the word dollar. So he allowed us to choose any other currency, as long as it wasn't the dollar.
Orice altă monedă, numai dolar să nu fie. Și am spus direct.
But we took it literally and said it cost 300 any other currency. People roared with laughter.
After 20 years in power, Ceausescu started planning his legacy. So in 1985, he and Elena signed a document proclaiming their decision to adorn Bucharest with a new government centre. The document was buried in the foundations. The project meant knocking down a quarter of the old city. "40,000 homes were demolished. There was no consultation and no appeal. These pictures were secretly taken by someone living on the edge of the destruction zone. Centerpiece of Ceausescu's new Bucharest was to be a palace of the people, second only in size to the Pentagon.
Fiecare sâmbătă, Ceausescu avea
Ceausescu inspected his building sites every Saturday morning.
Adică îl interesa absolut tot ce era șantier și ceea ce începuse să se construiască.
Preparing for these visits was quite exhausting. He had enormous vitality. No detail was too insignificant. He required a precise explanation about everything we did. He was very abrupt.
For the construction workers, this was exhausting and dangerous. One worker had to disguise his identity when he spoke to an undercover Western reporter while Ceausescu was still in power.
Reggel 7-től este 7-ig kellett dolgozni. Őrülten nagy munkanormát adtak. Amikor a napi munkadagot nem dolgoztuk le, ott látottak minket, és tovább kellett dolgozni addig, amíg be nem fejeztük. Az én századomból 6 hónap alatt 13 ember halt meg. 2 felakasztotta magát, a többi üzemi baleset következtében halt meg.
Ceausescu also started to knock down Romanian villages and move the inhabitants to new towns. This would both clear more land for agriculture and tighten his stranglehold on the peasants. The story of how Lenuta and Marin Sărescu's house was demolished is depressingly typical. The method used was to dig a large hole and to bulldoze the house with all its belongings into it.
We took anything we could grab quickly.
Did you resist?
If we had, they'd have taken us to the militia station and beaten us. Some resisted, and they got beaten up, so people just shut up.
They were allocated a flat in a new block. It had no doors, windows, running water, or heating.
When I reached the stairs, my knees were shaking, coming from a beautiful house to these ruins. No door, no window, nothing. Debris everywhere, everything a disaster.
So in desperation, Lenuta and Marin bribed an official to let them move into a nearby flat. This too had no running water or heating, but it did have a small garden.
Pentru noi, țăranii, e o catastrofă.
For us peasants, it was a catastrophe. They took away my house and land and gave me a flat for which I have to pay rent. I've got no money to pay the rent, no way to make a living.
Many people who lost their homes were traumatized. At the same time as thousands were losing their homes, the regime of shortages that Ceausescu was inflicting on his subjects was making him more and more unpopular. Food became very scarce. Ceausescu was exporting Romanian food to pay off the country's huge foreign debts. Pig's trotters were known as patriots, as they were the only parts of the pig which didn't leave the country. For Nicolae Melinescu, with a working wife and a newborn child, finding the time to shop was very difficult.
So there was a saying that if you don't have a grandfather or grandmother, you should buy one, because they came in very handy. They would do all the queuing for you. And my father would volunteer. He loved my son very much, so no sacrifice was too much for him. And he would queue 14 hours to get half a packet of butter for my son.
Paraskiva and Marian Niagu were typical of the thousands of peasants who moved to towns to get work. For them, the shortages were an even bigger problem because they didn't have a residence permit. This meant they weren't eligible for food coupons.
If somebody offered me meat, some lard or chicken's legs and throats, I never refused. Even colleagues at work gave me food because they knew I had 3 children and I had nothing to feed them.
Because they had no residence permit, they weren't eligible for a government flat either. They had to rent privately this leaking shack which had no bathroom or lavatory. For heating and cooking, they used an improvised electric stove. But during the 1980s, there were more and more power cuts.
We had electricity in the daytime, but at night they cut it off, which meant we couldn't cook. If we had wood for the fire, we could at least stay warm, but if not, we froze.
The increasing number of daytime cuts made the house even colder. Those with central heating did not fare much better, as the periods when it was on grew ever shorter, and even then the temperature was never above 12 Celsius. All this was a major source of dissatisfaction. Our student comedy group did a sketch on how the average Romanian started his day. But as so many of the words they wanted to use, like for instance, food, were banned by the censors, the sketch was silent.
A man wakes up in the morning, goes to have a shower, and tries to turn on the taps. Of course, there was one. No matter how hard you tried to turn it on, nothing would ever come out, because it was the hot water tap, and there was no hot water at that time. On the other hand, the cold water tap got larger and larger. I wanted to make a comparison between how big the tap was and how little water was coming out, because even cold water was rationed at the time.
Silvio was fortunate that the party didn't issue a list of forbidden gestures as well as forbidden words.
Finally, Romanians could laugh no longer. Revolution broke out. There was a series of sporadic, disorganized but deadly encounters in Bucharest and other cities. In the middle of this mayhem, Paraskiva's husband went missing. She and the children set out to look for him.
I had our younger daughter in my arms, and the older one was walking in front of me. If she'd been one step further away, she would have been hit by a bullet. But you couldn't see anybody. You looked around for snipers, but bullets came from the most unexpected directions.
But the revolution got a decisive boost when the army changed sides. The Ceausescus were captured. On Christmas Day, they were brought to trial.
He took his hat off and smoothed his hair down. I couldn't recognize him. He was looking around, frightened.
Paratrooper Ionel Boiru first took the Ceausescus to this room for a medical examination.
Unlike Nicolae Ceausescu, who smelled normally, like somebody who takes care of himself, she smelled embarrassingly bad, but she behaved normally.
S-a comportat normal în continuare.
During the trial, there was considerable concern that forces sympathetic to the old regime might try and rescue the Ceausescus.
I was in the courtroom and under orders to execute them if that happened, even at the risk of shooting other people.
The Ceausescus were accused of killing thousands of people during the revolution and in the years before.
Crimă prin înfometare, prin lipsă de căldură, prin lipsă de lumină. Dar cea mai odioasă crimă a fost crima de a încătușa spiritul românesc, sufletul acestui popor.
E o minciună, nu recunosc că am făcut poporul, vă spun ca să vă gândiți bine că e o minciună în fals și arată acum cât de lipsă de patriotism și ce trădare s-a comis în țara.
This was a show trial. After 90 minutes, it ended with the Ceausescus being sentenced to death.
Everybody went out of the courtroom and I was left alone with them. A lieutenant colonel entered the room and ordered me to take them out separately and shoot them. But they said no. They wanted to die together. Then I asked the officers to grant them their last wish, to be shot together. I ordered my men to set their machine guns on automatic fire to make sure we wouldn't miss. I fired 29 cartridges in 3 rounds. The first one hit Nicolae in the knees, and the second in his chest. And the third round hit Elena Ceausescu.
Nu mai trage nimeni.
Because the 2 paratroopers with him panicked and were slow to open fire, Boiru believes it was his shots which killed Nicolae and Elena.
Ridică-l să-l vedem. Ridică-l să-l vedem. Ridică-l, mai sus capul.
He got exactly what he deserved. I still think that.
The Ceausescu's death, like their life, was a spectacle. The men who had taken over needed to show that they were now in charge.
I saw the dead bodies on television, and I saw the same scene over and over again, and it was like we couldn't get enough of it, you know, to see that, to make sure that it was happening, that they were really dead.
Paraskiva's husband, Marianne, died in the revolution. This is what he said the last time he left home.
Even if he were to die, he still would have no regrets if his children were to have a better life, a happier life, a more comfortable life than ours, not to be tormented like we were.
Altogether, some 1,140 people were killed and over 3,000 injured during the revolution. One legacy of the Ceausescu years is the monster palace which, now completed, dominates Bucharest. Less quantifiable is the effect of the dictators on the minds and self-respect of Romanians who lived under the Ceausescu shadow for nearly 25 years. The end of communism across Eastern Europe was sudden, unexpected, and greeted with great enthusiasm. But what has replaced it has not always been universally welcomed. As Karl Marx, the founder of communism, once said, men make their own history, but they do not make it as they choose.
You can see all three parts of The Lost World of Communism on BBC iPlayer. Coming up now on BBC Two, for veteran broadcaster and traveller Alan Wicker, an opportunity to reflect on his life and career starting in Venice and his transition from soldier to journalist.